Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is me Rachana and I am back with my book reading series Read with Rachana. अनि आज 10औं दिन भएको छ हाम्रो यो बुक रिडिङ सिरिज स्टार्ट भएको। 10औं दिनसम्म आइपुग्दाखेरि धेरै कुराहरू मैले सिकिसकेको छु यो बुकबाट र जतिजनाले सपोर्ट गरिदिनु भएको छ, जतिजनाले मलाई हौसला दिइराख्नु भएको छ, इन्करेज गरिदिइराख्नु भएको छ, थ्याङ्क यू सो मच। थोरैजना हुनुहुन्छ, कम्युनिटी अझै सानो छ बट स्टिल धेरै सपोर्ट पाइरहेको छु। सो थ्याङ्क यू सो मच, म एकदमै एप्रिसिएट गर्छु। सो आज हामी 10औं दिनमा आइपुगेको छौँ। तपाईँहरूलाई मैले बनाएको कन्टेन्टहरू राम्रो लाग्छ, मैले गरिरहेको कामहरू मन परिरहेको छ भने चाहिँ प्लिज मलाई सपोर्ट गरिदिनु होला, अहिले एकदमै ज़रुरत छ। लाइक गरिदिनु होला, सेयर गरिदिनु होला, सब्सक्राइब गरिदिनु होला मन पर्यो भने, र आफ्नो साथीहरू इफ कोही यस्तो बुक रिडिङमा इन्ट्रेस्टेड हुनुहुन्छ भने उहाँहरूलाई पनि सेयर गरिदिनु होला। यति भन्दै आजको हाम्रो डे 10 लाई म सुरु गर्न चाहे र बिकमिङ मी भन्ने हाम्रो फर्स्ट च्याप्टरको 6 पार्टमा छु र आज म यो पार्ट सकाउने मेरो प्लान छ। सो लेट्स गेट इन्टु इट। My financial aid package at Princeton required me to get a work study job, and I ended up with a good one, getting hired as an assistant to the director of TWC. I helped out about 10 hours a week when I wasn't in class, sitting at a desk alongside Loretta, the full-time secretary, typing memos, answering the phone, and directing the students who came in with the questions about dropping a class or signing up for the food co-op. The office sat in the front corner of the building with sun-flooded windows and mismatched furniture that made it more homey than institutional. I loved the feeling of being there, of having office work to do. I loved the little jolt of satisfaction I got any time I finished off some small organizational tasks. But more than anything, I loved my boss, Journey Brussels. Journey was a smart and a beautiful black woman, barely 30 years old, a swift-moving and a lively New Yorker who wore flared jeans and waist sandals and seemed always to be having 4 or 5 ideas at once. For students of color at Princeton, she was like an over-mentor or ultra-ship and always outspoken defender-in-chief, and for this she was universally appreciated. In the office, she juggled multiple projects, loving the university administration to enact more inclusive policies for minorities, advocating for individual students and their needs, and spinning out new ideas for how all of us could improve our lot. She was often running late, blasting out Center's front door at a full sprint, clutching a sheaf of loose paper with a light cigarette in her mouth and a purse draped over her shoulder, shouting directives to me and Loretta as she went. It was a heady experience being around her, as close up I had ever been to an independent woman with a job that thrilled her. She was also, not incidentally, a single mother raising a dear, precocious boy named Jonathan, whom I often babysat. Journey saw some of potential in me, though I was also clearly short on life experience. She treated me like an adult, asking for my thoughts, listening keenly as I described the various worries and administrative tangles students had brought in. She seemed determined to awaken more boldness in me. A good number of our questions began with, have I ever, for example, read the work of James Cone? Have I ever questioned Princeton investment in South Africa, or whether more could be done to recruit minority students? Most of the time the answer was no. But once she mentioned it, I became immediately interested. Have you ever been to New York? She asked at one point. The answer was again no, but Journey soon rectified that. Saturday morning, we piled into her car, me and young Jonathan and another friend who also worked at TWC, and rode along as Henry drove full speed towards Manhattan, talking and smoking all the way. You could almost feel something lifting off her as we drove, and unspooling tension as the white fenced horse farms surrounding Princeton gave away to chalked highways and finally the spires of the city rising in front of us. New York was home for Journey the same way Chicago was home for me. You don't really know how attached you are until you move away, until you have experienced what it means to be dislodged, a cork floating on the ocean of another place, sorry. Before I knew it, we were in the teeming heart of New York, locked in a flow of yellow taxis and blaring car horns. Our journey floored it between spotlights, hitting our brakes at the absolute last second before a red light caught our shot. I don't remember exactly what we did that day. I knew we had pizza. We saw Rockefeller Center, drove through Central Park, and caught sight of the Statue of Liberty with our hopeful wasted torch. But we were mainly there for practical reasons. Journey seemed to be recharging by her soul by running through a list of mundane errands. She had things to pick up, things to drop off. She double parked on busy cross streets as she dashed in and out of the buildings, provoking an avalanche of honking ire from other drivers, while the rest of us sat helplessly in the car. New York overwhelmed me. It was fast and noisy, a less patient place than Chicago, but Journey was full of life there, unfazed by jaywalking pedestrians and the smell of urine and stacked garbage wafting from the curb. She was about to double park again when she seized up the traffic in her rear view and suddenly seemed to think better of it. Instead, she get turned to me in the passenger seat, indicating I should slide over and take her place behind the steering wheel. You have a license, right? She asked. When I answered with an affirmative note, she said, Great, take the wheel, just do a slow loop around the block, or maybe two, then come back around. I'll be 5 minutes or less, I promise. I looked at her like she was nuts. She was nuts, in my opinion, for thinking I could drive in Manhattan, me being just a teenager, a foreigner in this unruly city, inexperienced and fully incapable, as I saw it, of taking not just her car but her young son for an uncertain, time killing of spin in the late afternoon traffic. But my hesitancy only triggered something in the journey that I'll forever associate with New Yorkers, an instinctive and immediate pushback against thinking small. She climbed out of the car, giving me no choice but to drive. Get over it and just leave a little, was her message. I was learning all the times now. I was learning in the obvious academic ways, holding my own classes, doing most of my studying in a quiet room at the Third World Center or in a carrel at the library. I was learning how to write effectively, how to think critically. I had inadvertently signed off for a 300 level theology class as a freshman and floundered my way through, ultimately salvaging my grade with an 11th hour. Leave it all on the field effort on the final paper. It wasn't pretty, but I found it encouraging in the end, proof that I could work my way out just about any hole. Whatever deficits I might have arrived with coming from an inner city high school, it seemed that I could make up for them by putting in extra time, asking for help what I needed it and when I needed it, and learning to pace myself and not procrastinate. Still, it was impossible to be a black kid at a mostly white school and not feel the shadow of affirmative action. You could almost read the scrutiny in the gaze of certain students and even some professors, as if they wanted to say, I know why you are here. These moments could be demoralizing, even if I am sure I was just imagining some of it. It planted a seed of doubt. Was I here merely as a part of social experiment? Slowly, though, I began to understand that there were many versions of quotas being filled at the school. As minorities, we were the most visible, but it became clear that special dispensations were made to admit all kind of students whose grade or accomplishments might not measure up to the acknowledged standard. It was hardly a strict meritocracy. There were the athletes, for example, there were the legacy kids whose father and grandfathers had been tigers or whose families had funded the building of a dome or a library. I also learned that being rich didn't protect you from failure. Around me, I saw students flaming out, white, black, privileged or not. Some were seduced by weeknight cake parties, some were crushed by the streets of trying to live up to some scholarly ideal, and others were just plain lazy or so out of their element they needed to flee. My job, as I saw it, I was to hold steady, earn the best grades I could, and get myself through. By sophomore year, when Sujan and I moved into a double room together, I figured out how to better manage. I was more accustomed now to being one of the few students of color in a packed lecture hall. I tried not to feel intimidated when classroom conversation was dominated by male students, which it often was. Hearing them, I realized that they weren't all at all smarter than rest of us. They were simply emboldened, floating on an ancient tide of superiority, buoyed by the fact that history had never told them anything different. Some of my peers felt their authorness more acutely than I did. My friend Derek remembers white students refusing to yield the sidewalk when he walked in their path. Another girl we knew had 6 friends over to her dorm room one night to celebrate her birthday and promptly got hauled into the dean's office, informed that her white roommate evidently hadn't felt comfortable with having big guys big black guys in the room. There are so few of us minority kids at Princeton. I suppose that our presence was always conspicuous. I mainly took this as a mandate to overperform, to do everything I could to keep up with or even blow past the more privileged people around me. Just as it had been at Whitney Young, my intensity was spawned at least in part by a feeling of I'll show you. If in high school I had felt as if I were representing my neighborhood, now at Princeton I was representing my race. Anytime I found my voice in class or nailed an exam, I quietly hoped it helped me make a larger point. Suzanne, I was learning was not an overthinker. I nicknamed her Screwsy for the impractical, side-winding course of her days. She based most of her decisions who she had dated, which class she took, primarily on how fun it was likely to be. And when things weren't fun, she quickly changed direction. Well, I joined the Organization for Black Unity and generally stuck close to the Third World Center. Suzanne ran track and managed the lightweight football team, enjoying the fact that it kept her close to cute athletic men. Through the eating club, she had friends who were white and wealthy, including a bona fide teenager movie star and a European student rumored to be a princess. Susan had felt some pressure from her parents to pursue medicine, though eventually gave up on it, finding that it messed up with her joy. At some point, she was put on academic probation, but even that didn't seem to bother her much. She was the librarian to my Shirley, the Annie to my Bert. Our shared room resembled an ideological battlefield, with Sujan presiding over a wrecked landscape of tossed clothing and strewn papers on her side, and me perched on my bed, surrounded by fastidious odor. You really gotta do that, I would say, watching Sujan arrive back from track practice and head to the shower, stripping off her sweaty workout outfit and dropping it on the floor where it would leave, intermingled with clean clothes and unfinished school assignments for the next week. Do what? She would say back, flashing her wholesome smile. I sometimes have to block out Sujan's chaos so I could think straight. I sometimes wanted to yell at her, but I never did. Susan was who she was. She wasn't going to change. When it got to be too much, I had to scoop up her junk and pile it on her bed without comment. I see now that she provoked me in a good way, introducing me to the idea that not everyone needs to have their file folders labeled and alphabetized, or even have to have files at all. Years later, I would fall in love with a guy who, like Suzanne, stored his belongings in heaps and felt no compunction really ever to fold his clothes. but I was able to coexist with it. Thanks to Susan, I'm still coexisting with that guy to this day. This is what a control freak learns inside the compressed or the world of college. Maybe above all else, there are simply other ways of being. Mhm. Have you ever, Journey said to me one day, thought about starting a little after school program for kids? She was asking out of compassion, I would guess. Over time, I had grown so dedicated to Jonathan, who was now in elementary school, that a good number of my afternoons were spent wandering around Princeton with him as my sidekick, or at the Third World Center, the two of us playing duets on its poorly tuned piano or reading on a saggy couch. Journey paid me for my time but seemed to think it wasn't enough. I'm serious, she said. I know plenty of faculty members who are always looking for after school care. You could run it out of the center. Just try it and see how it goes. With Journey's word of mouth advertising, it wasn't long before I had a gaggle of 3 or 4 children to look after. There were the kids of black administrators and professors at Princeton, who themselves were a profound minority and, like the rest of us, tended to gravitate towards TWC. Several afternoons a week, after public elementary school let out, I fed them healthy snacks and ran around with them in the lawn. If they had homework, we worked on it together. For me, the hours flew. Being around children had a wonderful obliterative effect, wiping out school stress, forcing me out of my head and into the moment. As a girl, I had passed whole days playing mommy to my dolls, pretending that I knew how to dress and feed them, brushing their hair and tenderly putting band-aids on their plastic knees. Now I was doing it for real, finding the whole undertaking a lot messier but no less gratifying than what I had imagined. I had go back to my dorm after a few hours with the kids, drained but happy. Once a week or so, if I found a quiet moment, I'd pick up the phone and dial the number for our apartment on Euclid. If my father was working early shifts, I could catch him up in the late afternoon, sitting, or so I imagined, with his legs up in his reclining chair in our living room, watching TV and waiting for my mom to get home from work. In the evenings, it was usually my mother who picked up the phone. I narrated my college life in exacting detail to both my parents, like a homesteader dutifully providing dispatches from the frontier. I spilled every observation I had, from how I didn't like my French professor to the antics of the little kids in my after school program, to the fact that Susan and I had a dedicated mutual crush on an African American engineering student with transfixing eyes, who, even though we torchly shadowed his every move, seemed to barely know where we were alive. To know we were alive. My dad chuckled at my stories. Is that right? He would say. And how about that? And maybe that engineer boy doesn't deserve either one of you girls? When I was done talking, he ran through the news from home. Dandy and Grandma had moved back to Dandy's hometown of Georgetown, South Carolina, and Grandma, he reported, was finding herself a bit lonely. He described how my mother was working overtime trying to care for Robbie, who was now in her 70s, widowed and struggling with an array of health issues. He never mentioned his own struggle, but I knew they were there. At one point, when Craig had a home basketball game on Saturday, my parents drove all the way to Princeton to see it, and I got my first look at their shifting reality, at what never got said on the phone. After pulling into the west parking lot outside Jadwin Gym, my father reluctantly slid in a wheelchair and allowed my mother to push him inside. I almost didn't want to see what was happening to my father. I couldn't bear it. I had done some research on multiple sclerosis in the Princeton library, photocopying medical journal articles to send to my parents. I had tried to insist that they call a specialist or sign Dad up for some physical therapy, but my dad primarily didn't want to hear any of it. For all the hours we spent talking on the phone while I was at college, his health was the one topic he wouldn't touch. And if I asked how he was feeling, the answer was always, I feel good, and that would be that. I let her voice be my comfort. It bore no trace of pain or self pity, carrying only good humor and softness and just the tiniest hint of jazz. I lived on it as if it were oxygen. It was sustaining and it was always enough. Before hanging up, he always asked if I needed anything, money for instance, but I never said yes. सो आजलाई हामी यही ऱ्यापअप गर्छौँ मैले आज पार्ट 6सम्म सकाएँ सो भोलिबाट चाहिँ म 7th पार्टबाट स्टार्ट गर्दैछु र जति पनि पार्टहरू पढिरहेको छु कुनै न कुनै वेमा चाहिँ इन्सपायर भइरहेको छु मोटिभेट भइरहेको छु किनभने लाइफमा कति धेरै प्रब्लम्सहरू आउँछ कति धेरै सिचुएसन्सहरू आउँछ तर टाइम उति नै हुन्छ सबैसँग रिसोर्सेस कम होला धेरै होला कसैसँग धेरै होला कसैसँग कम होला बट इफ हिम्मत गर्ने हो र इफ होइन कुनै कुरा कन्सिस्टेन्टली गर्ने हो गर्न सक्छु भनेर एउटा दृढ विश्वास राख्ने हो भने चाहिँ जे पनि कुराहरू गर्न सकिनु रहेछ असम्भव कुराहरू पनि पोसिबल हुने रहेछ भन्ने कुराहरू चाहिँ मैले धेरैभन्दा धेरै सिकिरहेको छु एक्सपिरियन्स गरिरहेको छु होइन उसको कथाहरूबाट सो राम्रो लागिरहेको छ अनि थ्याङ्क यू सो मच फर स्टेइङ टिल हियर यहाँसम्म हेरिदिनु भयो भने धेरै 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 धन्यवाद यसरी नै साथ सहयोग गरिदिनु होला केही फिडब्याकहरू छ भने प्लिज फिडब्याक पनि दिनु होला थ्याङ्क यू सो मच थ्याङ्क यू फर स्टेइङ टिल द एन्ड आई विल सी यू टुमोरो थ्याङ्क यू बाई बाई